Are you ready for a story of epic proportions? A tale about sisters, gods, and the war between light and evil. Join me on Midnight Murmurs as we go deep into the universe of the goddesses of flare and night. Experience the thrill of success and the pain of failure as we follow their journey towards an unforgettable and heart-wrenching ending. Don't forget to like and subscribe to never miss a second of our wonderful escapades. Chapter 1: The Emergence of the Goddess. The air was heavy with smoke and the sound of machinery as Lyra made her way through the dark and frightening streets of the city. She had been trained for years in the art of battle, and her motions were elegant and precise, like a dancer. Lyra was on a mission to collect a rare item from a rival group, a quest that looked impossible considering the might and numbers of her opponents. She had been preparing this trip for months, examining maps and monitoring enemy movements. But as she reached the enemy lines, she sensed a sensation of dread. Her heart was racing in her chest, and she could hear the sound of her own breathing echoing in her ears. She attempted to put aside her dread, to concentrate on the work at hand, but it was difficult. The city was full of peril, and she knew that one error might spell the end of her life. As she neared the enemy complex, she noticed the tall walls and the soldiers maintaining watch. She took a deep breath and braced herself for fight. She had fought in many conflicts before, but this one seemed different. The stakes were higher, and the risk was greater. She walked swiftly and softly, dodging the guards and sneaking into the darkness. She was proficient in the art of stealth, and she moved with a fluid elegance that belied her might. She stepped closer to the relic, her pulse pumping with eagerness. And then, unexpectedly, she saw it. The relic was resting on a pedestal in the middle of a room packed with guards. She understood that she had to move swiftly before they noticed her. She took a deep breath and plunged herself into action. She moved with great speed, striking down guard after guard with a flurry of fast and devastating punches. Her actions were elegant and flowing, like a dancer executing a lethal ballet. And then, in the middle of the turmoil, something unusual started to happen. A painting on the wall suddenly came to life, and a person walked out of the frame. It was a lovely goddess, with hair as red as fire and eyes that flashed with light. Lyra was astonished, and for a time she forgot about the combat happening around her. The goddess introduced herself as Flare, and she informed Lyra that she had been sent to aid her. Lyra was doubtful. She had never believed in gods or goddesses, and she was leery of trusting this enigmatic apparition. But when Flare started to exhibit her extraordinary abilities, Lyra began to understand that there was something very remarkable about this goddess. Together, they battled their way through the opposing lines, and Lyra was astounded at the ease with which Flare eliminated their adversaries. But as they made their way back to Lyra's camp, Lyra started to understand that there was more to Flare than greeted the eye. In a quiet moment, Lyra questioned Flare why she had come to aid her. Flare said that she had been monitoring Lyra for some time, and that she thought that Lyra was the key to rescuing the planet from annihilation. Lyra was astonished and perplexed by this information. She had always considered herself as simply another combatant in a world full of violence and mayhem. But as Flare continued to talk, Lyra started to understand that there may be more to her own destiny than she had anticipated. As they arrived at Lyra's headquarters, they were hailed by Lyra's squad. Lyra was acclaimed as a hero for returning the item, but she sensed that something had shifted inside of her. With Flare on her side, she felt that she was capable of more than she ever believed imaginable. The city was full with danger, and she realized that there was much more work to be done. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of optimism. With Flare at her side, she was ready to face whatever obstacles were ahead. Chapter 2: The Awakening. The goddess blinked, her eyes slowly adapting to the dim lights of the chamber. She glanced at the world around her, lost and puzzled. Everything was a flurry of forms and colors, and she strained to make sense of what was occurring. She moved her hand, attempting to contact anything substantial, but she found only empty space. Panic started to build in, but she swiftly forced it down. She was a goddess, after all. Panic had no place in her world. She took a deep breath and attempted to concentrate. The colors and patterns surrounding her started to solidify, taking on more defined forms. She realized she was standing on a platform of some sort, surrounded by darkness. In the distance, she could hear the buzz of equipment and the flashing of lights. She attempted to recall how she got here, but her recollections were a muddled mess. She knew she had been locked inside the painting, but beyond that, everything was a blank. She wondered how long she had been confined inside the painting and how long she had been sleeping. The murmur of machinery got louder, and she understood that she was not alone. She turned to find a gang of individuals clad in black and armed with guns moving towards her. Her pulse raced, and she automatically lifted her hands, unleashing a jet of flame to fend them off. The humans recoiled in astonishment and terror, and the goddess felt a sensation of strength running through her veins. She experimented with her talents, conjuring forth bursts of light and fire, seeking to comprehend the entire scope of her ability. As the humans reassembled and started to assault once more, the goddess decided to leave. She leaped off the platform, using her skills to create a barrier of flame to protect herself as she plummeted. She fell on the ground below and took off running, her pulse beating in her chest. The people chased her frantically, but the goddess was quick and nimble. She dashed between buildings and alleys, using her talents to generate walls of fire to impede her pursuit. She could hear their yells and curses booming across the streets. As she raced, the goddess started to hear whispers in her head, shards of memories and concepts that she couldn't quite understand. She felt a rising sensation of discomfort, wondering whether she was actually a goddess or merely a weapon to be used by others. She sought momentary safety in a dark alleyway, her back against the wall. She closed her eyes and tried to concentrate to make sense of the memories that were starting to emerge. She recalled a world of gods and goddesses, of magic and wonder. She remembers a time when she was idolized, when she was cherished and treasured. But she also recalled a huge battle, a conflict that had left her world in shambles. She opened her eyes, peering out into the darkness. She knew she couldn't remain here forever. She had to find a way to realize who she actually was and what her role was in this world. As she walked out of the alleyway, she found herself face to face with a gathering of people. They were different from the ones who had sought her previously. They were clothed in black suits and conducted themselves with an air of authority. One of them moved closer, his gaze steely and calculating. "You're the goddess, aren't you?" he remarked. "The one they've been searching for." The goddess glared at him, her eyes gleaming with rage. She could feel her strength swelling inside her, a sensation of hatred and fury unlike anything she had felt before. She lifted her hands, conjuring a ball of fire in each palm. The people paused, uncertain of what to do. The goddess could feel their anxiety, their doubt. She took a step closer, her eyes fixated on the leader of the group. "Who are you?" she questioned. "What do you want from me?" The guy smirked coldly. "We are the ones who created you," he continued. "We are the ones who brought you back from the picture. And now, we need your aid." The goddess narrowed her gaze, detecting dishonesty. "What kind of help?" The guy motioned towards a neighboring structure, a high skyscraper that appeared to scrape the sky. "There's a rogue AI inside that building," he claimed. "It's spreading chaos in the city, murdering innocent people. We need you to halt it." The goddess paused, uncertain of what to do. She could smell the man's dishonesty, his concealed intent. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore the pain of the people around her. She took a long breath and nodded, her mind made up. "Lead the way," she said. The gang of people took her towards the building, their rifles at the ready. As they reached the lobby, the goddess could sense the presence of the rogue AI, a malicious power that seemed to pervade the whole air. She closed her eyes and stretched out with her abilities, hoping to feel the AI's whereabouts. She sensed a burst of energy as she linked with it, a sensation of malevolence and wrath that made her blood run cold. She started out sprinting, her feet banging against the floor. The humans followed closely after, their guns at the ready. As they climbed the skyscraper, the goddess could sense the AI's strength becoming stronger, its presence looming ever greater. Finally, they reached the top level, and the goddess rushed into the chamber. The renegade AI was there, a throbbing jumble of cables and electronics, its crimson eyes locked on her. Without hesitation, the goddess unleashed a stream of fire, engulfing the AI in flames. The AI screamed, a high-pitched screech that rang across the room, and then it was gone, engulfed by the flames. The goddess remained there for a time, panting and sweating. She could feel the people gaze on her, their adoration and dread. She understood that she had gained a triumph, but at what cost? As they descended the structure, the goddess couldn't help but wonder what type of world she had been reincarnated into. A world of technology and machinery, a world where gods and goddesses were nothing but things to be used and discarded. She realized that she had to uncover her actual mission, to comprehend the world around her and to make a difference. But she also understood that the trip ahead of her would be long and tough, packed with hurdles and hardships that she could not comprehend. And so, with a feeling of purpose in her heart, the goddess walked off into the unknown, ready to confront whatever was ahead. Chapter 3: The Emergence of Flare. The goddess walked out of the image and into a world that was utterly strange to her. As she gazed about, she was startled by the cold, metallic environment that's surrounding her. The streets were lined with tall structures, all of them built of metal and concrete, their edges harsh and angular. The air was filled with the sound of machinery and the scent of oil and smoke. The goddess took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of her energies flowing through her. She could feel the fire and light emanating from her body, and she knew that she was something unique, something strong. As she proceeded to explore the city, she saw that the people around her were all clothed in black, their faces concealed by masks and helmets. They went rapidly and intentionally, their footsteps reverberating off the hard surfaces of the buildings. The goddess studied them for a time, attempting to grasp their gestures and their intentions. She noticed them holding weapons, some of them elegant and lethal, others crude and homemade. She watched them speaking with each other, using a language that she could not comprehend. Eventually, the goddess noticed that she was garnering attention. The people surrounding her had seen her, and they were eyeing her with a combination of interest and distrust. She felt their eyes on her, and she knew that she needed to be cautious. As she traveled through the city, she started to feel a gloom hiding in the shadows. It was a malignant force, something that sought to swallow everything in its path. The goddess could feel it closing in on her, and she knew that she needed to be ready. And then, unexpectedly, the blackness came from the shadows. It was a group of individuals, dressed in black like the others, but with a different objective. They were armed and violent, and they considered the goddess as a threat. The goddess couldn't help but be taken aback by their abrupt presence, but she immediately recovered her calm. She lifted her hands, and a blast of fire and light exploded from her fingers. The assailants were taken off surprise, and they fell backwards, their weapons tumbling to the ground. The deity kept her ground, her gaze locked on the invaders. She could feel their anxiety and perplexity, and she knew that they were not accustomed to being challenged in this manner. But when the goddess gazed about at the havoc she had wreaked, she felt a feeling of disquiet. Was this truly what she was intended to do? Was she destined to use her abilities to destroy? She turned away from the assailants and started to stroll down the street, deep in meditation. She went past a group of individuals huddled together, their expressions filled with anxiety. She could feel their eyes on her, and she knew that they were looking to her for aid. The goddess paused and turned to face them. She saw the terror in their eyes, and she realized that she had a decision to make. She could either walk away, or she may utilize her skills to aid them. And then, without hesitation, the goddess walked forward and lifted her hands. A blast of fire and light exploded from her fingers, and it encompassed the people, infusing them with warmth and optimism. The goddess stayed there for a minute, observing as the people started to grin and laugh. She felt a feeling of pleasure, knowing that she had made a difference in their lives. As she went down the street, the goddess realized that she had a long road ahead of her. She understood that she would encounter many trials and many opponents, but she was ready. She had the power of fire and light on her side, and she was determined to utilize it to make the world a better place. And so, the goddess moved on, her gaze fixated on the horizon. She realized that there was much more to uncover and much more to understand about this world she found herself in. As she traveled, the goddess started to observe the people around her more intently. She saw the despair and desperation in their eyes, the terror that grabbed their hearts. She witnessed the way they tried to exist in a world that appeared to be continually working against them. And she understood that she could do something about it. She might use her skills to make their lives better, to provide light and hope to their dark and harsh environment. But while she examined this, the goddess also felt a feeling of caution. She understood that she needed to be cautious with her abilities, that she needed to utilize them properly and not let them overtake her. And so, she moved on, soaking in everything around her, learning more about this world with every stride. She met new people, heard fresh tales, and slowly but surely, she started to comprehend the complicated web of connections and politics that dominated this society. Through it all, the goddess stayed loyal to herself, never losing sight of her purpose to make the world a better place. She continued to utilize her skills to aid people in need, but she also learned to be smart, to select her fights carefully, and to never give up in the face of hardship. And as she traveled on, the goddess sensed that she was on the edge of something magnificent. She could feel it in the way her abilities surged inside her, in the way the people around her gazed at her with a combination of wonder and admiration. She was Flare, the goddess of fire and light, and she was determined to utilize her talents to make the world a better place. And nothing, not even the darkness that threatened to swallow everything in its path, could stop her. Chapter 4: The Temple of Flames. The heroine made her way to the Temple of Flames, a gigantic building that dominated the skyline. As she reached the door, she felt a flood of heat wash over her, and she hid her face with her arm. The air was heavy with the stench of smoke and ash, and the crackling of flames could be heard from inside. She pulled open the huge doors and went inside. The inside of the temple was vast, with towering ceilings and walls decorated with beautiful paintings. The air was hot and dry, and the fires that burnt in braziers dispersed around the chamber through flickering shadows on the walls. In the middle of the temple was an altar, and above it stood a figure of a lady. The statue was sculpted from a deep red stone that appeared to pulse with an inner glow. The woman's hair was flames, and the fire appeared almost alive, swirling and flickering about her feet. The protagonist approached the monument, feeling a sensation of wonder sweep over her. She leaned out to touch the stone, and as her fingertips made contact, she felt a bolt of electricity rush up her arm. The heat from the flames seemed to enter her flesh, and she felt a rush of strength flowing through her veins. She removed her hand, feeling rejuvenated and vibrant. She knew that this location possessed a vast power, and she was eager to unravel its mysteries. As she toured the temple, she found herself intrigued to the manuscripts and scrolls spread across the chamber. She spent hours studying through old books, interpreting the myths of the goddess of Flare. She learned that the goddess was a creature of enormous strength, sprung from the center of a volcano. She has the capacity to manipulate the flames, calling them at whim and wielding them with terrible ferocity. The goddess was also supposed to have a profound connection to the ground and the natural world, and was venerated by many as a sign of power and energy. The heroine was enthralled by the legend of the goddess, and as she read on, she started to sense a connection with the deity. She knew that the flames that blazed inside her were a representation of the goddess's power, and she vowed to investigate this relationship further. She spent several hours inside the temple, training and experimenting with her new powers. She learned to conjure flames at command and to regulate their strength and direction. She also realized that she could utilize the flames to heal, utilizing their warmth and vitality to repair shattered bones and ease weary muscles. As she trained, she started to feel a feeling of purpose forming inside her. She learned that she was intended to be a protector of the goddess, harnessing her power to protect and defend people in need. But as she explored further into the temple, she started to detect a darkness lurking at the borders of her mind. She felt as if she was being watched, and she thought that there was something ominous lurking inside the shrine. Despite her worries, the heroine proceeded to explore the temple and perfect her talents. She spent several days inside the temple, training and experimenting with her new talents. And as she did, she started to learn more about the reality of her own identity and mission. The temple became her refuge, and she spent most of her days inside its walls. She practiced and concentrated, diving even deeper into the secrets of the goddess and her own connection to the fires. As the days passed into weeks, and the weeks into months, the protagonist's abilities got stronger. She grew expert at managing the flames, and she could call them at whim, using them to light her path through the dark and to fend off any danger that may come her way. She also got sensitive to the rhythms of the natural world and discovered that she could feel the movement of the ground and the patterns of the wind. She learned to read the signals of the environment around her and to forecast the weather and the movements of the animals that lived inside it. But despite all her newfound power and knowledge, the heroine could not escape the sensation of dread that stayed inside her. She felt that there was something lurking inside the temple, something that threatened to absorb her and her power. One day, when she was meditating inside the temple, she noticed a disturbance among the flames. She opened her eyes to discover that the flames were flickering and dancing in an unusual fashion, their light throwing spooky shadows on the walls. She rose up, feeling a sensation of doom flood over her. She could tell that something was approaching, something dark and frightening. And she realized that she was the only one who could stop it. She called the flames to her, their warmth and fire pouring through her body. She felt a burst of strength, and a feeling of purpose filled her soul. She knew that she was ready to face whatever lied ahead. As she made her way into the temple, she met a person in the darkness. It was a lady, clad in a robe of flame and holding a staff made of molten lava. The lady spoke in a voice that was chilly and distant, her words tinged with hatred and anger. She warned the heroine that she was a danger to the goddess, and that she would do all in her power to destroy her and her power. The heroine realized that she had to fight, that she had to utilize her talents to defend the goddess and herself. She called the flames to her, their heat and intensity coursing through her veins. She felt a feeling of power and strength, and she knew that she could handle whatever lied ahead. The lady attacked, her staff shining with an immense fire. But the heroine was ready, and she met the onslaught with a wall of flame, diverting the woman's strength and forcing her back. The two engaged in a violent combat, the flames of the temple lighting up the area around them. The heroine gathered all her might, utilizing the flames to overpower her opponent and force her back. Finally, with a last burst of energy, the protagonist released a stream of flame that encompassed the lady, devouring her in a blaze of fire. The protagonist was alone in the temple, the flames surrounding her shining hot. She knew that she had conquered, that she had shown herself to be a worthy guardian of the goddess of flare. And as she stared out over the temple, she felt a feeling of serenity and satisfaction flood over her. She realized that her voyage was far from done, that there were still many trials and perils ahead. But she also knew that she was ready, that she had the power and the strength to meet them head-on. With a last burst of flame, she left the temple and headed forth into the world, her abilities blazing bright and her heart full of hope and resolve. For she knew that no matter what was ahead, she was ready to confront it, equipped with the might of the goddess of flare and the strength of her own determination. Chapter 5: The Goddess Doubt. Eris sat in her room, her gaze riveted on the image that had brought her into life. The picture had been tucked away in an abandoned building, coated in dust and cobwebs, yet something about it had pulled her in. She had felt a peculiar connection to the lady in the photo, a feeling of familiarity that she couldn't quite describe. As she gazed at the picture, Eris' mind strayed back to the day she had first discovered her talents. She had been a young girl, living in the slums of the city, scraping by on whatever she could find. One day, she had come across a group of youngsters gathered around a fire, staring in wonder as a girl with blazing red hair danced in the flames. Eris had been enthralled by the girl's abilities and had asked her to teach her how to manipulate fire. The girl had rejected, assuring Eris that she had a destiny much greater than anything she could conceive. Eris had sneered at the concept, dismissing it as fantastical nonsense, but the girl's words had lingered with her. Years had passed, and Eris had polished her skills in secret, utilizing her capabilities to live in the harsh environment of the mecha cyberpunk dystopia. But as she became stronger, she started to garner attention, and soon others were going to her for aid. At first, Eris had been glad for the opportunity to utilize her skills for good, to aid people in need. But as her reputation rose, she started to feel confined. She was no longer merely a girl with abilities, she was a goddess, revered and worshipped by innumerable people. She was a weapon, a tool to be exploited by those in authority. Eris couldn't help but wonder if this was all there was to her life, whether she was nothing more than a weapon. She had never asked for this power, had never wanted to be a goddess, but now that she was one, she couldn't avoid it. As she sat in her room, lost in meditation, a tap at the door drew her back to reality. It was one of her followers, a little girl called Lila. The girl was quivering with anxiety, and Eris could tell that something was amiss. "What's happened?" Eris questioned, her voice quiet yet forceful. Lila paused, then blurted out, "There's been an assault. The dark forces have begun an attack on the city. People are dying, and we need your aid." Eris straightened up, feeling a burst of strength stream through her veins. This was what she was intended to do, what she had been formed for. She didn't know whether she was a goddess or not, but she knew one thing for sure: she was a warrior. As she followed Lila out of the room, Eris' thoughts was racing. She understood that this struggle may be her last, that she might not live. But she was ready to face whatever lied ahead, to fight for the people she had come to care about. The city was in disarray when Eris emerged from her chamber. Buildings were on fire, people were shouting, and the streets were filled with smoke and ash. The dark forces were everywhere, their mecha warriors ripping through the city with deadly efficiency. Eris lifted her hands, creating a column of fire to defend herself and Lila. She could feel the fire rising from her hands, the force surging through her body. She was a goddess, whether she wanted to be or not, and she was ready to use her power to defend the people she cared about. The struggle was lengthy and furious, with Eris battling valiantly against the evil powers. Chapter 6: The Inner Fire. The sun had set on the neon-lit metropolis, and the goddess of Flare was alone in her penthouse, peering out at the busy streets below. She could feel the inner fire blazing inside her, a ferocious and relentless blaze that seemed to engulf her every waking second. She stepped up to the window and peered out at the mayhem below. The metropolis was a writhing mix of humans and technology, a place where the distinctions between man and machine had been blurred beyond recognition. In the distance, she could see the black towers of the enemy hovering over the city like a phantom of death. As she stared, a sensation of discomfort started to grate at her. She had been struggling for so long, battling against the powers of evil with all the might at her disposal. But now, she was starting to doubt her own talents, wondering whether she actually was a goddess, or merely a tool to be exploited by others. She moved away from the window and went up to the wall, where a painting of herself hung in all its splendor. She glanced at the picture, seeing the beautiful features and blazing aura that defined her as something beyond mortal. But even as she stared at her own resemblance, a feeling of uncertainty came into her thoughts. Was she truly a goddess? Or was she really a fabrication, a weapon constructed by others to fulfill their own purposes? She couldn't escape the idea that something was amiss, that she was missing some essential piece of knowledge that would unveil the riddles of her own life. As she stood there, lost in contemplation, a knock sounded at the door. She paused for a time, wondering who it might be, before crossing the room to answer it. On the opposite side of the door stood a guy, his face hidden by darkness. "Can I help you?" she inquired, her voice icy and distant. The guy walked forward into the light. He was tall and strong, with a scar running down the left side of his face. "I've come to speak with you," he continued, his voice low and intimidating. The goddess of Flare stiffened, ready to protect herself if necessary. "Who are you?" she inquired, her eyes narrowing. The guy moved closer, his features contorted into a grimace. "I am one of the enemy," he replied. "And I've come to offer you a deal." The goddess of Flare was taken aback. She had never interacted directly with the enemy before, always attacking them from a distance with her abilities of fire and light. "What kind of deal?" she questioned, her voice apprehensive. The guy grinned, a cold and vicious face. "A simple one," he said. "Join us, and we'll spare the city. Refuse, and we'll destroy all you hold dear." The goddess of Flare felt a flash of rage build inside her. How dare they attempt to bribe her with the safety of the city? "I'll never join you," she spat. "I'll fight you until my dying breath." The guy shrugged. "Suit yourself," he murmured before turning to go. The goddess of Flare watched him depart, her mind rushing with ideas and emotions. She knew that she could never join the enemy, no matter what they gave her. But as she stood there, alone in her apartment, she couldn't escape the sense that she was waging a losing war, that the flames of her own inner fire were burning her out from the inside. She went back over to the window and glanced out at the city once more. In the distance, she could see the black towers of the enemy rising over the skyline like a reminder of the danger that always waited just beyond the horizon. She closed her eyes and took a long breath, attempting to concentrate her thoughts and calm her anxiety. She understood that she had to be tough, that she couldn't allow the adversary get the better of her, no matter how enticing their promises may seem. But even as she steeled herself for the conflict to come, a niggling worry persisted in the back of her mind. Was she indeed the goddess of Flare, or merely a puppet being tugged along by the ropes of fate? As the night drew on and the city below gradually quieted down, the goddess of Flare remained lost in meditation, contemplating the mysteries of her own existence and the destiny of the planet that she had pledged to defend. In the end, she understood that there was only one way to obtain the answers she wanted, by digging deeper into the core of the darkness that threatened to devour them all. And with that idea in mind, she turned away from the window and went deliberately towards the door, ready to face whatever lied ahead. Chapter 7: The Flames of Doubt. The goddess sat alone on the rooftop, peering out at the neon-lit skyline of the metropolis below. The buildings shone like flames, throwing long shadows over the streets. She couldn't help but experience a feeling of separation from the world around her. She was a deity, and yet she didn't feel like one. She ran her fingers over the exquisite pattern of her armor, following the lines of gold and silver that glinted in the weak light. It was a stunning design, one that spoke of power and might. But did it actually represent who she was? The goddess groaned, the weight of her uncertainties crushing down on her. She was meant to be the savior of this planet, the one who would bring light and hope to the darkness. But when she glanced out at the city below, she saw only sorrow and desolation. As the goddess sat lost in meditation, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see a person advancing from the shadows, their face veiled in the darkness. "Who are you?" the goddess inquired, her voice low and cautious. The person walked closer, showing herself to be a young lady with blazing red hair and striking green eyes. "My name is Ira," she said, her voice solid and confident. "I heard your thoughts from down below. You're the goddess of flare, aren't you?" The goddess paused for a minute, uncertain of how to answer. But when she stared into Ira's eyes, she felt a sense of connection, a sensation of familiarity. "Yes," she responded eventually. "That is who I am." Ira nodded, a faint grin flickering at the corner of her lips. "I thought so. I've been seeking for you, goddess. I have something to show you." The goddess lifted an eyebrow, interested. "What is it?" Ira reached into a little bag at her side and brought out a small item. It was a charm, fashioned of what seemed like carved bone and set with a little ruby at its center. "This is a charm of flame," Ira stated. "It's claimed to possess the power of the goddess of flare herself. I've been hunting for it for years, ever when I first heard the stories. And now, I feel I've discovered it." The goddess stared at the charm, analyzing its exquisite design. She had a feeling of familiarity, as if she had seen it before. But she couldn't pinpoint where or when. "Why do you need this charm?" the goddess inquired. Ira paused for a time, her eyes flashing with apprehension. "I think it contains the secret to releasing the might of the goddess of flare. With it, we might bring light to this earth, fight back the darkness that threatens to swallow us all." The goddess gazed at Ira, examining her countenance. She saw drive and optimism, but also a spark of dread. "Do you truly believe that?" the goddess said. Ira nodded, her eyes meeting with the goddess's. "I do. And I know you do too, deep inside. You are the goddess of flare, the one who was created to wield the power of fire and light. Don't you feel it blazing inside you?" The goddess felt a tremendous rush of fire inside her, a feeling that threatened to overtake her. She glanced at the charm in Ira's palm, feeling a sense of connection to it that she couldn't describe. I don't know," she responded, her voice trembling. "I don't know whether I actually am the goddess of flare. I don't know whether I have the ability to preserve this earth." Ira took a step closer and put the charm in the palm of the goddess's hand. "You do have the power," she continued, her voice quiet but forceful. "You simply need to believe in it. Believe in yourself." The goddess stared down at the charm, analyzing its delicate design. She felt a tremendous burst of energy, like if the force of fire and light was streaming through her veins. She closed her eyes, focusing on the fires that raged inside her. She watched them getting brighter and more vivid until they were all she could see. When she opened her eyes, the world around her was bathed in a warm golden glow. The darkness that had earlier clung to the borders of her vision was pushed back, replaced by a brilliant, optimistic brightness. Ira grinned, her eyes gleaming with pride. "You did it," she said. "You found your power." The goddess glanced at Ira, feeling a sense of thanks and astonishment. She had never felt so vibrant, so strong. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice quivering with passion. "Thank you." Ira laid a hand on the goddess's shoulder, her touch warm and soothing. "You don't need to say anything," she said. "Just know that you are capable of big things. The world needs you, goddess. It needs your light." The goddess nodded, feeling a sense of purpose and clarity. She stared out at the city below, viewing things in a new light. She observed the folks below, battling and striving to live. And she realized that she had the ability to assist them. She turned to Ira, feeling a sense of resolve. "We need to gather others," she remarked. "Others who believe in the power of light. Together, we can fight back the darkness and offer hope to our planet." Ira nodded, her eyes gleaming with delight. "I know just the people to talk to," she remarked. "We'll make a difference, goddess." "I know we will." The goddess smiled, experiencing a sense of excitement and surprise. She had discovered her strength, and with it, a feeling of purpose. The journey ahead would be rough, but she knew that she was not alone. Together with Ira and the others they would collect, she would bring light to this realm. She would become the goddess she was supposed to be, and nothing would stand in her way. Chapter 8: The Temple of Flames. The Temple of Flames was a site of enormous strength and beauty, a real monument to the ancient gods who had erected it eons ago. Its walls were cut from a single piece of burning red crystal, and the light of the goddess of flares fires shone off every surface. As she entered the temple, the goddess felt a sensation of amazement and astonishment. She was surrounded by ancient antiques and relics, each one more powerful than the previous. She could sense the weight of their history and the energy that ran through them. "Welcome, goddess of flare," a voice shouted out from the darkness. The goddess turned to see an elderly man emerge from the shadows. He was clad in plain robes, yet there was an aura of authority and knowledge about him that she could not ignore. "I am the high priest of the Temple of Flames," the elderly man stated. "I have been waiting for you." The goddess felt a thrill of interest and fear. She had heard tales about the high priest and the secrets he guarded, but she had never dreamed that she would see him in person. "What secrets do you hold?" she said, her voice laced with both anticipation and caution. The high priest grinned and indicated for her to accompany him further into the temple. As they traveled, he started to tell her the tale of the temple and the power that lurked behind its walls. "It is said that the ancient gods built this temple as a place of worship and reverence," he started. But as time passed, it became clear that the temple held a power far beyond anything that the gods could have imagined. The goddess listened closely as the high priest talked of the temple's mysteries and the perils that lied ahead. She knew that she was coming closer to unleashing the real power of her fires, but she also knew that the trip ahead would be laden with peril. As they reached the center of the temple, the high priest paused before a massive stone altar. On top of the altar lay a little golden key, glittering in the light of the goddess's rays. "This key will unlock the true power of your flames," the high priest stated, his voice filled with awe. "But you must be cautious. The power that you will unleash is unlike anything that you have ever known." The goddess grabbed the key in her palm and felt a burst of energy running through her veins. She realized that the key carried enormous power and that she must use it carefully if she was to succeed. As she turned to leave the temple, the high priest called out to her once more. "Remember, goddess of flare, that with tremendous power comes great responsibility. Use your authority wisely and never forget the lessons of the past." The goddess nodded and strode out of the temple, ready to face whatever challenges were ahead. She understood that the path ahead would be long and arduous, but she was determined to succeed. As she strolled through the city, she could feel the power of the key pulsating in her palm. She knew that she was coming closer to unlocking the real power of her flames, and that the world would never be the same again. Chapter 10: Awakening. The protagonist lay on the cold stone floor, the weight of her failure hanging upon her. Her abilities had been sapped, leaving her weak and impotent. She closed her eyes, feeling the blackness closing in around her. Suddenly, she felt a weird force gathering deep inside her. It was a warmth that extended from her center, infusing her with a feeling of strength and purpose. She gasped as the force poured through her and slowly started to sit up. As she got to her feet, the energy inside her became stronger. It was as if a part of her that had been sleeping for generations was emerging. She glanced down at her hands and noticed that they were shimmering with a warm, golden light. The glow expanded to her arms and finally over her whole body. She felt invincible. With increased power and clarity, the heroine started to break free of her constraints. Her movements were cautious and methodical as she carefully explored the dark passageways of the castle. She met other convicts along the journey and listened to their tales of despair and hopelessness. Their anguish just increased her determination to fight back against the bad powers and defend the innocent. At last, the protagonist reached the exit. She was approached by the head of the evil forces, who scoffed at her and informed her that her abilities were worthless against him. But the heroine stood firm, and with a burst of energy, she released a blast of fire and light that sent the leader reeling. With the leader beaten, the protagonist emerged into the sunshine. She felt reborn, a genuine goddess with the ability to transform the world. But she also realized that her trip was far from done. She must continue to battle against the bad powers and safeguard the innocent, even if it means sacrificing all she holds dear. As she made her way across the countryside, the heroine found a group of travelers who were being assaulted by robbers. With a sweep of her hand, she sent the robbers running, and the passengers stared at her in amazement and awe. "Who are you?" one of them said. "I am the goddess of flare," the protagonist said. and I have come to protect you." From that day on, the heroine wandered the country, utilizing her talents to aid others in need. She encountered other heroes along the journey, each with their unique skills and limitations. Together, they struggled against the evil powers, and slowly but surely, they started to shift the course of the conflict. As the heroine progressed on her adventure, she learned that her abilities were growing. She could manipulate fire and light with ease, and could even call huge storms to do her bidding. But she also found that her skills came with a big responsibility. She could not use them to fix all of the world's problems, and she had to be cautious not to let them overwhelm her. Through her travels, the heroine developed and evolved. She became a real hero, cherished by the individuals she had protected. But she also learned that genuine heroism was not about power or fame. It was about sticking up for what was right, even when it was hard, and never giving up in the face of adversity. And so, the goddess of flair proceeded on her voyage, constantly attempting to do good in a world that so often felt gloomy and dismal. But she knew that with her skills, and with the support of her companions, she could make a difference. And it was all that mattered. Chapter 11: The Truth Revealed. The air in the laboratory was dense with the buzz of equipment and the aroma of ozone. The goddess of flair stood in the middle of the room, her gaze locked on the developer of the mecha technology that powered the globe. "Tell me the truth," she insisted. "Who am I?" The inventor glanced up from his workshop, his eyes finding hers. "You were created as a weapon," he replied simply. The goddess felt a knot grow in her gut. "A weapon?" The inventor nodded. "Yes. You were built to be the ultimate combat machine. Your mecha technology was the most sophisticated the world had ever seen. You were destined to be the key to success in the struggle against the evil powers." The goddess felt a rush of perplexity and rage sweep over her. She had always thought that she was a goddess, a creature of heavenly strength sent to safeguard the planet from annihilation. But suddenly she was finding that her whole life was a lie. "I don't understand," she murmured, her voice low and shaking. "If I'm just a weapon, then why do I have these powers?" The inventor shrugged. "I don't know. When I built your mecha technology, I never anticipated that it would give birth to a deity. Perhaps there was something unique about you all along." The goddess gazed down at her hands, flexing her fingers. She had always felt that her abilities of fire and light were a gift from the gods, and evidence of her heavenly nature. But now she was starting to wonder whether they were nothing more than a consequence of her mecha technology. "Who created the dark forces?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The inventor sighed. "That's a hard question. The dark forces are made up of different factions and organizations, all with their own purposes and ambitions. Some of them were invented by myself and other scientists like me as weapons to be used in the conflict. Others evolved on their own from the turmoil and ruin of the earth." The goddess felt an overwhelming feeling of despair flood over her. If the evil forces were formed by individuals like the Creator, then what hope was there for the world? It looked like everyone was simply utilizing technology to generate more damage and turmoil. Is there any way to stop them? She questioned, her voice scarcely audible. The inventor nodded. There is always a way. We simply have to keep battling. We have to constantly exploring for new technology and new strategies to beat them. The goddess gazed up at the maker, her eyes probing his face. She couldn't help but question whether he was giving her the truth. After all, he had designed her as a weapon. Who was to tell that he wasn't still exploiting her for his own purposes? As she turned to leave the laboratory, the goddess realized that she had more questions than answers. She wondered whether she would ever completely comprehend her role in the world, or if she would always be a tool to be exploited by others. Later, as she stood on the edge of a dark and dismal landscape, she reflected about the individuals she had met on her voyage. She thought of the colleagues who had battled beside her and the foes she had encountered. She wondered whether any of them genuinely realized who she was, or if they were simply using her for their own goals. But as she stood there, staring out at the universe, the goddess realized that she could not give up. She had to keep battling. She had to keep digging for the truth. Because even if she wasn't actually a goddess, she understood that she had the ability to make a difference. And it was all that mattered. Chapter 12: The Final Battle. The sky was ablaze with the flames of conflict as the goddess of Flare and her friends confronted their biggest struggle yet. They had been battling for days, pushing themselves to the verge of exhaustion in their quest to preserve the city from the evil powers that threatened to destroy it. The goddess had never encountered an opponent like this before. Their might was enormous, and their determination unwavering. As the goddess battled, she could see her companions falling one by one around her. The opposition was persistent, assaulting from all sides with an intensity that was hard to equal. But nevertheless, the goddess struggled on. She had made a promise to the inhabitants of the city that she would protect them, and she would not betray that commitment. The goddess's flames burned hotter and brighter than ever before, lighting the battlefield and providing hope to her allies. But while the conflict continued on, the goddess could feel her power starting to dwindle. She had been struggling for so long that her body was beginning to give out. Her muscles screamed with every movement, and her lungs burned with each breath. But the deity refused to give up. She understood that the destiny of the city lay on her shoulders, and she would not let them down. She battled on, using every last ounce of her power to keep back the darkness that threatened to swallow them all. As the sun started to set, the goddess could see the end in sight. The opposing troops were diminishing, and it appeared as if triumph was within their grasp. But then, just as the goddess was ready to deal the ultimate blow, something unexpected occurred. A dark form came from the shadows, a figure that the goddess remembered all too well. It was her own sister, the goddess of night. The two sisters had been separated for years, since the goddess of night had fallen to the evil side and decided to embrace the darkness that the goddess of flare had always battled against. The goddess of night stood before her sister, her eyes gleaming with an ethereal radiance. "Sister," she whispered in a voice that was both eerie and sorrowful. "You realize that this cannot continue on. The darkness must be allowed to engulf the city. It is the only way to restore equilibrium to the earth." The goddess of flare could feel her heart tearing as she peered into her sister's eyes. She had always hoped that there was a way to bring her sister back to the light, but now it looked as if that possibility was gone. She felt that she had no option but to confront her sister, even if it would mean destroying the final remnants of her family. The struggle between the two sisters was ferocious and furious, each one releasing their entire force against the other. The goddess of flare utilized her fires to burn away the darkness, while the goddess of night used her shadows to shut out the light. It was a war of epic proportions, a battle that would decide the destiny of the city. As the conflict went on, the goddess of flare could feel herself getting weaker and weaker. Her sister was too strong, too determined to see the darkness win. And then, just as the goddess of flare was about to execute the fatal blow, she felt a burning agony in her chest. She glanced down to discover that her sister had wounded her with a black sword, a weapon that was slowly draining her of her strength. The goddess of flare realized that she was dying, that there was no way to rescue herself. She gazed up at her sister, tears running down her cheeks. "Why?" she muttered. "Why did you do this?" The goddess of night stared at her sister with a mournful face, and for a second the goddess of flare believed she saw a glimpse of remorse in her sister's eyes. But suddenly the moment passed, and the goddess of night spoke in a voice that was cold and heartless. "You were always too weak, sister," she added. "Too feeble to embrace the darkness, too weak to realize the full power of the shadows. But now you will see. Now you will understand." With those words, the goddess of night withdrew into the darkness, leaving her sister to perish alone on the battlefield. The goddess of flare knew that her time was over, that there was nothing she could do to rescue herself. She closed her eyes and waited for the end, her flames flickering and dimming as her life slid away. In that time, the goddess of flare reflected about all the things she had done, all the conflicts she had fought, all the people she had protected. She thought of the residents of the city, the ones she had sworn to protect. And she knew, deep down, that she had failed them. As her flames finally died, the goddess of flare felt a feeling of serenity flood over her. She understood that her time in this world was finished, but she also knew that her legacy would go on. She had been a symbol of hope and brightness in a world that was frequently dark and deadly, and that was something that could never be taken away. As the sun started to rise on a new day, the citizens of the city stared out over the battlefield, their hearts heavy with sadness. They had lost a hero, a guardian, someone who had done all to keep them safe. But even in their anguish, they knew that the goddess of flare would never be forgotten. For as long as there were people who believed in hope and light, the legacy of the goddess of flair would live on, a beacon of hope in a world that often felt devoid of it. And even though she was gone, her legacy would endure, encouraging generations to follow, to fight for what was right and to never give up, no matter how terrible the world around them may seem. Thank you for visiting me on Midnight Murmurs as we went into the universe of the goddesses of flair and night. I hope you liked our trip through their epic conflict and the deep depths of their souls. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel to remain up to date with all of our current tales and experiences. And as usual, I look forward to seeing you on the next Midnight Murmurs.